All right, I've got all the counters finally sorted now into their respective force pools for the Commonwealth, France, and Germany. We go back to the campaign and player's guide to the scenario information here for what we're setting up. This is going to tell us how to set up the markers on the turn record chart, such as who has the initiative, where the initiative marker goes, etc. So coming over to the turn record chart, we've got the year marker in the 1940 box. We have the turn marker on the May-June turn on the production circle. The initiative marker is in the axis +2 box as instructed, and the impulse marker is in the first impulse box with the axis side showing, since they will have the first impulse. Down here in the lower left-hand corner, you have this general record track, and if you're playing just pure classic, you won't need any of these markers, but I just wanted to show you what I like to do with my pilot in training markers when I'm using the pilot optional rule, which is an optional rule that I highly recommend, and I play with it every time. But I'll just stack up the various major power pilot and training markers and leave them right here in the general vicinity of the markers track. There you can see there are an offensive points marker, saved oil, as well as a number of pilots. So with that done and the turn record track set up, we need to now figure out how and where to set up all of our units. And for that, we're going back to the campaign guide, and we're going all the way to the very back where we have the setup charts. And this is going to take a few minutes to explain. So let's take a closer look at this, because these can be a little confusing if you aren't used to using them. All of the unit setups for each scenario in the game are located at the back of the campaign and player's guide, and they're broken down, separated by these black bars. So you can see Victory in the West, the scenario we are going through the setup for right now, is located here. Here's the next scenario in the book. Then you've got Guadalcanal down here, and so on. And some of them you'll need to be careful of. For instance, Battle of the Titans, it's going to start here, and the setup continues on to the next page down to here. Now, for the scenario we're interested in, you will see down the left-hand side here, these colored bars separate each of the major powers that are involved in the scenario. We have Commonwealth, France, and Germany in our case. They're also numbered 1, 2, 3. This is the order in which the major powers set up for that particular scenario. So in our case, the Commonwealth player will set up all of the Commonwealth units first, followed by the French player setting up the French units, and then finally the German player will set up last. These charts look to be created using some sort of spreadsheet software like Excel. And that's kind of how you're going to read them. There's a series of columns here starting on the left-hand side, and then rows. Now, across the top, you'll see it's broken down into sections, more or less. The first section here are all of the land units, and it says World in Flames, American Flames, and Patent in Flames land units. So if you don't have American Flames or Patent in Flames, you can kind of ignore that. There are only a handful of scenarios, and they're all at the very end of the scenario list that will use any American Flames or Patent in Flames components. Then below that section, the land units are further broken down into headquarters, armor, mechanized, motorized, infantry, militia, garrison, and other land in each of these columns. I find it very helpful when doing the setup to get some kind of a straight edge, and I will line up the straight edge to make it a little easier to read. In the far left-hand column, underneath each of the major powers, you will see a list of locations. So in this instance, we have UK, France, repair pool, and then a couple of turns on the production chart. So these if you see a date, a couple of months here, that will be the turn on the production circle over here where you will set those up. Those are actually reinforcements that will be arriving. They will have been, the production of them will have begun prior to the beginning of whatever scenario you are playing. So in order to ease the setup and being able to read these, I will go ahead and usually lay a straight edge here, and then that way I'll be able to read across and get all of the units I need for that particular location. Now further across the top, we were looking at the land units here. Next comes your World in Flames, American Flames, Patent in Flames aircraft. So the aircraft section is going to be right in here. Then you've got naval units, and you'll see it says Note 1. The notes in the setups are always located at the bottom of that particular major powers setup block. So Note 1 for the Commonwealth is here, and you will simply use the whatever ships it has listed in this note will go where Note 1 is. In this case, it'll be the UK. Now this particular skinny purple column here is for offensive points. If you are not playing with the offensive points optional rule, you can simply ignore that. Now we get into the Planes and Flames aircraft. If you are using the Planes and Flames aircraft, the optional rules, you will set up both the World in Flames aircraft as well as the Planes and Flames aircraft. If you're not using Planes and Flames, if you're just going straight vanilla classic, you can ignore the Planes and Flames section. The pilot column as well. Now we have the ships in flames, cruisers in flames, and convoys in flames. And again, Note 2. So in this instance, if you were using ships in flames, in the UK, you would set up, as far as naval units go, you would set up both Note 1 and Note 2, which are found down here. And then to the right of the ships in flames ships, you will find your convoys in flames, divisions in flames, factories in flames, and territories in flames optional units. Again, if you're not using any of those options, you can ignore those. So in this case, if we're playing just a straight vanilla classic version of the game, we can safely ignore everything to the right of the World in Flames naval unit. So starting with this offensive points column, everything from here on over, we can just ignore. So we won't need any of that. We won't be referencing any of those. Now, to set up the units, we'll start with the UK, and we'll see that it's telling us in the UK, as far as land units go, we need to set up one mechanized corps and one infantry corps. So you will grab your respective force pools. In this case, I've got my infantry, and you will randomly select a unit, or as many units as it tells you to, from the force pool, which you will then set up in that location. So I have an infantry unit here, and when I grab the mechanized force pool, I'll shake that, and I will randomly draw one of those. Now, what our local group does, and this is purely a house rule, just something I'm going to throw out there for your consideration, is rather than make all of these draws random, we like to set them up chronologically. So we will take the units and set them up by the earliest availability dates. So for instance, in the case of the mechanized corps, there are 3 that are in the force pool for this particular scenario for the Commonwealth. You can see 37, 39, and 40. I just happened to randomly draw the 6-6, which is the earliest. If we were using our little house rule chronological order, that would be the one we would have selected. And with the infantry, there's a few more infantry here. There's a reserve, 1940, 32, and 36, and 35. Now, when the reserves have been called out previously to the as part of the setup, rather than the country being neutral and having the reserves begin the game in the reserve pool, we always treat the reserves as the earliest available year date. So in this case, the British, using our house rule system, the British would set up with the 2nd Infantry Corps and the 15th Mechanized Corps, rather than the random draw, which gave us the South African Infantry and the mechanized. Now, actually, the South African infantry would not be used because in these setups, they actually, if it's a nationality that is not the major power's primary nationality, so French for France or British for the Commonwealth, it will tell you that in the setup. And you can see here, for instance, under the French setup in France, they get as far as infantry corps, they get 6 infantry corps and MR. The MR is an abbreviation for Morocco, which means the French will set up 6 French infantry corps plus 1 Moroccan infantry corps in France. And you'll see that when we get to the French setup. So by drawing the South African, technically, we needed to separate out all of the non-British infantry corps, which would have also included that infantry corps before and a second Indian infantry corps before we randomly drew from these 3 units. Now, you'll go across the line and you will set up the aircraft the exact same way and your naval units the same way. So I'll show you what that looks like once we have gone through and set up. I'll go ahead and grab the mechanized corps, the infantry corps, all of the aircraft and the naval units here, and have them set up, and I'll show you what that looks like. Here we see all of the Commonwealth units scheduled to set up in the UK, When you're setting up units, land units can go in any hex in the location that is friendly controlled. Same with your aircraft. You do have to watch your stacking limits. So the Commonwealth decided to set up both of their fighter aircraft here in the minor port of Dover, which has a stacking limit of 2 aircraft. They put the remainder of their aircraft, there they are, the other 3 bombers, in the London hex, which is a city with a stacking limit of 3. They put both of their land units there, and they put their naval units in the major port of London. Now, the naval units must set up in either a major port or minor port. And again, you want to watch the stacking limits when you do so. Now we'll move on to the next location for the Commonwealth setup, which would be France, and then we'll get into the repair pool, July-August turn and September-October turn, and show you what those look like. Now, looking back at the setup chart, you can see that France is the next location for the Commonwealth, and they will have 1 headquarters, the Gort headquarters, and 2 motorized corps. Now, I usually keep the all of the headquarters units, since there are so few of them, in a single cup. If I want to build an armor HQ versus an infantry HQ, the cost is different, so I'll spend the points and I'll just draw those from there. But we see Gort here, so we will grab him. And headquarters, like ships, are set up by name, so you won't randomly draw those. And then I will randomly draw the 2 motorized corps that go in France. And you'll notice that since it doesn't have a country abbreviation next to it, we would not be eligible to set up the Australian, the Indian, or the Canadian motorized corps. So there would be, of the 3 British corps, we simply randomly select the 2 of those, or alternatively use the house chronological method, and we'll set these 3 counters up in France. Now here we have Gort and the BEF set up in France. Now they can set up in any hex, any friendly controlled hex in France, but keep in mind that the Commonwealth and France cannot cooperate, which means their units cannot stack together, nor can they participate in attacks together. And I know that the Commonwealth have 2 more land units here in London with transports that will be arriving shortly, probably in one of the channel ports here. So we've decided to set up the BEF here on the left flank of the Allied line. Now, going back to the next line in the setup, you'll see it's the repair pool, and you'll never find any land units or air units in the repair pool. So we'll come right over to the naval units, and you'll see it calls for the battleship Queen Elizabeth to be set up in the repair pool. And if you go to the repair pool, there is Queen Elizabeth face up in the repair pool. It will cost the Commonwealth 2 build points to put Queen Elizabeth out of the repair pool and back onto the production circle. And will also take 2 turns for her to arrive. So should they decide to repair Queen Elizabeth at the end of the May-June turn, she would go face up here in the September-October 1940 turn. The next line down is July-August, and in July-August you can see the Commonwealth will be scheduled to receive 1 single-engine fighter. Now, you probably heard me talk about cost for aircraft, because for years and years, that's how they were divided up, by cost. However, technically, this Fighter 2 and Fighter 3 refers to the number of turns it takes to build that type of fighter. Now, it just so happens to correspond that a fighter that takes 2 turns to build happens to be a single-engine fighter. while a fighter that takes 3 turns to build is a twin-engine fighter, and that is consistent with WiF. All of their twin-engine aircraft take 3 turns to build. All of their single-engine aircraft, you can see here is a land bomber. It also takes 3 turns, and you can see clearly from the artwork there that it is a twin-engine Hampton bomber. So these are technically by the turn length, which is also how you should be organizing them into your force pools. So the Commonwealth will receive, in the month of July, August, 1 single-engine fighter. So we will come over here and we will place this in the appropriate turn on the reinforcement. And in September, October, you'll see what they are due to receive in September, October actually is an armor division way over here. And since we're not using division, the divisional optional rule, we can safely ignore that. So nothing actually will get set up in September, October for the Commonwealth. And that is it for the Commonwealth setup. We would simply then proceed on to the French player and the French setup, and you'll see it works exactly the same as the Commonwealth. They have France and they have July, August. So everything that the French have is going to start in metropolitan France here, in this area here. They do have, you can see, 3 different headquarters listed. So you'll set up all 3 of those headquarters along with 1 armored corps, 1 motorized corps, 6 infantry, and remember they've got the MR abbreviation for the Moroccan. And you can see here with the militia, they will also get 4 French militia and they will get 1 Senegalese militia unit to set up along with 5 garrisons. And then you'll see 2 single-engine fighters, 1 twin-engine fighter, 1 twin-engine bomber, and a transport. And then from here on out, unless you're using any of the optionals, you would ignore that. And then finally, you can see here in Germany, Germany will have von Bock, Guderian, von Lieb, and Rundstedt headquarters set up in Germany. They do, however, have some reinforcements coming in the form of a couple of armored corps over the next few turns, and that's probably about it. But that's it for how to read the setup charts here and then what it looks like once you actually get it translated to the map. Now, once you've got the units from the setup chart fully onto the maps, you are almost done with the pre-game setup. There's just another step to go through, and we'll look at that here. Now, before we move on to the last step in the setup process, I wanted to give you an example and show you why removal of units from your force pool can be a good idea. What you see here are all of the single-engine fighters that are in the German force pool at the start of this scenario. As you can see, they've got a 3, a 2, a 3, a couple of 4s, a couple of 5s, and 4 6s. Now, obviously, the 6s are much better than the 2 or 3. The rule states that you can remove any aircraft with a date 3 years earlier than the scenario start if it's an active major power, which Germany is in this case. That makes these 3 units with a 37, 35, and 34 availability date eligible to be removed. Now, what that does, if you do remove those, now the worst fighter that the Germans can possibly draw is a 4, and there are only 2 of those, and it gives them a much better chance of starting with some of these 6s. The Germans start this scenario with 5 of these single-engine fighters, and you can see if you were to get a poor draw, you could end up drawing a 3, 2, 3, and 2 4s, which would give you no qualitative advantage over the French Air Force. And one of the things that the Germans rely on early in the game is a distinct qualitative and often a quantitative advantage over the Allies' air forces. So in this case, I would have chosen to remove these 3 aircraft from the German force pool. They aren't going to do me much good given the quality of Allied fighters that we can expect to face from here on out, so we won't really miss them. And now I would be randomly selecting from these 5 fighters, giving me an excellent chance of some 6s here, and then they end up getting 1 additional fighter to show up on the reinforcement, the production circle as a reinforcement in the next turn or 2. So I hope that kind of makes it a little bit clearer with a concrete example of how removing units from your force pool during the setup of a scenario actually can work out to your benefit. Now, let's take a look at the last thing we need to do before we can start a game of WiF. All right, we now have all of the units set up. Every major power, every player has gone through and finished setting up their units. There's one last step we need to do, and then we'll be ready to actually begin the game. And that is, every major power may now conduct a pre-game naval move. So you do this in the same order that you set up in. In this case, it would be Commonwealth, France, and then Germany. Now, in this scenario, which is a very small scenario, and it does not have, it's primarily focused on land and air fighting. There's not much of a naval aspect to this scenario. The Commonwealth is the only major power with any naval units aside from a single transport that the French have. You can see set up here. The Commonwealth would, since they set up first, they would have the opportunity to do a pre-game naval move. And all this is, you treat it just as if it was a naval move done last turn. So they could decide to take all of their naval units, including their transports here, and move out into the North Sea. And the transports would be taking along the ground units. They would move into, it would cost them one movement point to move into the sea zone. The slowest speed in the task force is a 4, which means they're eligible to enter the 3 box here. So they would move into the 3 box. Now, since the naval move occurred theoretically the previous turn, they would have remained at sea, and therefore at the end of the turn, they would have had to move down 1 box. Once every major power has an opportunity to do this, you are ready to go, and you can pick up with the very first step in the sequence of play for the side with the initiative. In this case, it's going to be the Germans having the initiative, and you will roll weather. The scenario information indicated it was a +2 to the die roll. You'll roll the die, consult the weather for May, June, and you are underway. So that's it for setup. And I know this was a rather long video, longer than a lot of the other ones I've done in this tutorial series. And I suppose that's kind of fitting considering how long it takes to set up a large game of World in Flames. I hope this clears up a lot of the questions you may have had regarding the setup process. If there's anything that I didn't cover that you have a question of, put it in the comments, and I will do my best to try and answer that or explain it to you. Once again, thanks for watching. Next up in the tutorial series, I promise, is naval combat, and we should get that up here probably in another probably about a week and a half, 2 weeks till we get the next one up. It's going to be another big episode, and I'm trying to figure out ways to keep it into down to a reasonable time length, and we will see you back here in early July for the next episode. Thanks a lot. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.